So in that first passage of Scripture there, it's talking about light and dark. The earth was without form and void. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. So it's like before God did what he was going to do, darkness was, because it was without God, it was darkness. And God said, let there be light. There was light. And God divided the light from the darkness. Who remembers being afraid of the dark as a kid? I don't think I was a really fearful kid. I don't know. I mean, but I remember being afraid of things. And when I was real small, I was afraid to go upstairs by myself. I don't know why. We had a 2-story house, and I didn't like being in the upstairs if nobody else was there with me. And so Mom would have me bring our dog Sadie with me upstairs so I wouldn't be afraid. I don't know what she was going to do, but that helped me. But I didn't want to admit when I was a kid that I was afraid of the dark. I would say stuff like, well, I'm not really afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of, what could be in the dark that I can't see, And at least one of my kids has said the same exact thing when we were talking about it a while back. And even, when I was a teenager, there was a show on Nickelodeon. ABC had TGIF. Well, Nickelodeon had SNICK. So that was like Saturday night, whatever. And then the last show of the lineup was Are You Afraid of the Dark? And that might be a question that I have for you today is, are you afraid of the dark? And this show was about kids sitting around a campfire and they're thinking up scary stories to tell each other or something. But when we think about darkness, there's some expressions that we know of, in the dark, meaning unaware, you're not informed maybe. Or a shot in the dark is you're taking a guess that you don't have any basis on it, you're just guessing something. Or a leap into the dark, you're taking a risk without knowing what the outcome could be. Or another phrase would be out of the darkness. That's coming out of a hard time or coming out of confusion. Or plunge into darkness, descending into a difficult or unknown situation. So, it's one word, but it's to us in our culture and the way we understand things, it can mean a lot of different things. Symbolic uses might be, the most common is evil, forces of darkness. In Star Wars vernacular, that would be called the dark side, dark side of the Force. Another word or another use or representation would be ignorance. If someone says they're left in the dark, or I don't want to be left in the dark, you don't want to be ignorant about something. Another representation would be sadness. They were going through a dark period in their life. Another one would be mystery of the unknown. He feared what was in the darkness. So there are, many ways we can look at this. Whether it's the darkness of evil, that's the classic one we know about, light versus dark, good versus evil, the classic struggle. The darkness of ignorance, not having all that information. The darkness of sadness, depression or even grief. Or the darkness of mystery, the unknown that can be in our lives. And we all face darkness in different forms, in different times. If not right now, we all have in the past, or we may in the future. It's just something that we deal with in life. It's the absence of light is dark, or the absence of knowledge is darkness. So, as humans, we want to know things. That's it's just a human trait. You don't want to be completely blindsided by anything. And so for the remainder of my time here this morning, I'm going to be focusing in on that sort of focus, the mystery part of it, the not knowing, the having to lean on your faith, really. And like I said, we want to know things. We want to know how to plan. We want to be able to, it might come down to personality type too. I saw a thing once where it was comparing different personality types, and it was saying husband is like this, wife is like this, and one was like, I have a schedule for every day of our vacation, and the other one was like, we have a schedule for every day of our vacation. Like, how is that a vacation? But in general, we do want to know things. We do want to not be left in the dark. So, and when we find ourselves thrust into a situation where we have no control, or we have no knowledge of how it's going to turn out, in our humanity, we're scared. That is scary, and it's natural. But we don't necessarily have to be. And it's one of those things where I just say, are you afraid of the dark? It's something we know we're going to go through. It's something we know as humans. We can't know everything. And so I've got 3 examples. And I'm going to start in the Old Testament. I've got an example in the New Testament. And then the third one is in more recent history. And when we're all done with that, we'll come up and spend some time together up in the front here. But the first example I want to give is found in 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 8 through 19. And I'll read it up here. Then the king of Syria warred against Israel, and took counsel with his servants, saying, in such and such a place shall be my camp. And the man of God sent unto the king of Israel, saying, beware that thou pass not such a place, for thither the Syrians are come down. And the king of Israel sent to the place which the man of God told him, and warned him of, and saved himself there, not once nor twice. Therefore the heart of the king of Syria was sore troubled for this thing, and he called his servants, and said unto them, will ye not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? And one of his servants said, none, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet that is in Israel, telleth the king of Israel the words that thou speakest in thy bedchamber. And he said, go and spy where he is, that I may send and fetch him. And it was told him, saying, behold, he is in Dothan. Therefore sent he thither horses and chariots and a great host, and they came by night and compassed the city about. And when the servant of the man God was risen early and gone forth, behold, an host compassed the city both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto him, alas, my master, how shall we do? And he answered, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes, that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. And when they came down to him, Elisha prayed unto the Lord and said, smite this people, I pray thee, with blindness. And he smote them with blindness, according to the word of Elisha. And Elisha said unto them, this is not the way, neither is this the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom ye seek. But he led them to Samaria. So I read that whole thing to point out a couple of big things. First of all, we can think we know what's going on. We can look with our human abilities and our 5 senses and our human logic. And just like Elisha's servant, we might say, there's no way out of this. This is hopeless. You see, you're just surrounded by everything. Elisha's servant, he woke up to find their city surrounded by a hostile army. He was terrified, and he cries out. But Elisha is calm and just tells him, don't be afraid. Those with us are more than those who are with them. And to his servant's, mind, to his own logic, he was probably, I don't know what he thought, but I know what a normal person would think. I don't see anybody. So Elisha prayed, opened his eyes to what was really happening, and he saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire. The other thing that I would point out is the second prayer that Elisha prayed against the enemy took away their sight. And when they couldn't see anymore, they were easily led away. They were easily led somewhere where they didn't plan to be. And when I was putting this together, I didn't know. I was either going to call it Are You Afraid of the Dark or eternity versus this present darkness. And but that's really what it's about. You know, Elisha's servant couldn't see through the present. He couldn't see through what was right in front of him to know what was coming. If we look at Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, and I'll read it in the King James first. It says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." Now, in the New Revised Standard Version, it says, I'll read it this way: "For our struggle is not against the enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." So this present darkness, is there something present in your life that you need to get a view beyond? You know, is there something present in our relationships or in our walk or in our circumstances that, you know, just like Elisha could say, open his eyes that he could see, you know, we have the benefit of looking backwards through time to say, oh yeah, well, of course, you know, everything was fine. And I feel like sometimes we need to tell ourselves that, you know, it's too bad we can't have, you know, future Josh, you know, tap me on the shoulder. Hey, just so you know, it's going to be okay, you know. The next example that I would say is John chapter 12, verses 12 and 13. And this is very pertinent to today. "On the next day, much people that were come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees and went forth to meet him and cried, 'Hosanna! Blessed is the King of Israel that cometh in the name of the Lord.'" So the crowds were welcoming him. And in the reverse of what happened in the story before, they were welcoming him because they didn't fully understand. They were welcoming him. They thought he was a political change. They thought, yay, we're going to get rid of this political power that's in place. They didn't fully understand what was about to take place. Their perception was limited. Many of them were expecting a political savior. They didn't expect a suffering Messiah. So in a sense, they were still in spiritual darkness. They weren't able to fully grasp the fullness of who he was and what he was there to do. And if we go on to the same chapter, verse 32, this is what Brother Jeff talked about earlier. It says, "And I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me." This he said, signifying what death he should die. The death on the cross, and you're lifted up. The people answered him, "We have heard out of the law that Christ abideth forever. How sayest thou, the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is the Son of Man?" Then Jesus said unto them, "Yet a little while is the light with you. Walk while ye have the light, lest darkness come upon you. For he that walketh in darkness knoweth not whither he goeth. While ye have light, believe in the light, that ye may be the children of light." These things spake Jesus, and departed, and did hide himself from them. And just like Brother Julson read earlier in that passage in the first chapter of Romans, it said their foolishness brought them into darkness. And when you're in darkness, you can't see what you're doing. I mean, that's why we have these cool little things that we go camping with. It's like a strap on your head, and you got a light right here. And you just, wherever you look, you got a light. But in our case, Jesus is that light. And we don't use Jesus to light wherever we want to go. We use the light of Jesus to know where we are supposed to go. I saw a picture somewhere on Facebook, I don't know. It was this image, and it had like this line right down the middle. On the left side, it showed the paths available to you when you're born. And then in the middle, it was like, here you are now. And so everything between when you were born and when it was where you are now showed the path you took, and then it showed all these other paths that you maybe were spared from or whatever you could have taken, but you didn't. But then it said the paths available to you, and it continued after that line. And just like before, there's all these paths. And it's true. You know, there's a million ways you can go in your life, but you want to go where Jesus wants you to go. You want to go on the path that's set before you. And I was talking to someone a while back, and we were talking about how it'd be nice if you just, I guess the comparison was kind of like you're crossing a dark sea. You know, this life is not easy always, and if you just had a rope to hang on to, and you could take that whole rope across to the very end, and in some ways it's like that, but in other ways it's like every step of your life you're stepping out in faith, and I have the option to do this or this, which is going to get me closer to Jesus. Or, you know, when I was a teenager, there was the bracelets that said, what would Jesus do? You know, and it sounds probably really cliche these days, but the sentiment is valid. You know, how are we going to get closer to Jesus? Are we going to go this way or that way? And while the path may not look like completely straight and narrow right in front of us, our lives are going to go closer to Jesus, closer to Jesus, closer to Jesus, if we have that as our focus. So the same crowds who were shouting, Hosanna, by the end of the week were shouting, crucify him. So he was the light in their midst, but many couldn't see through their present darkness, those circumstances, because they had an expectation of, oh, he's going to bring this political upheaval. He's going to bring back what we thought we wanted, what's going to be good for us. And they couldn't see through the lens of eternity that he has come to bring salvation. They were thinking of Roman oppression. They were thinking of their own fears, you know, of the time. But we do have this benefit of seeing from our vantage point, looking back, you know, looking through everything that we see in the Bible. And we think, well, how could they not believe? How did they not understand? How did they not know, you know? But we could probably say the same things to ourselves sometimes. You know, how did I not believe that it really is going to be okay? How did I not, you know, really walk in faith? And I'm probably preaching to myself more than anybody, but that's the second one. Now, the third one, this is more recent in history. This is from the 20th century. And I think one of the darkest periods of the 20th century, I think if we took a poll, many would probably agree, was World War II. I mean, you had just this insane military power that wanted to take over the entire world, literally. And in the spring of 1940, Germany began its invasion of France. And I thought I knew a lot about World War II, but I heard about something just this past week that had me just kind of jump in and look at things that I never really knew before. Many of you probably know this already, but for anybody who doesn't, I hope they think this is cool. So after months of relative quiet on the Western Front, Nazi Germany launched its full-scale offensive against Western Europe on May 10th. So the attack came through the Ardennes Forest, which is a region that the Allies thought was just too rugged for the tanks to get through. They thought this is a safe part. But on May 12th through the 15th, the German panzer divisions of tanks, they came through that forest and they crossed the Meuse River. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. The Meuse River. And by May 20th, they reached the English Channel, cutting off the Allied forces in the north from the rest of France. So as far as a military operation, I would say they pretty much completely dominated that situation there. And this left over 400,000 British and French troops surrounded near the coast with their backs to the sea. So that's an insane, immense number of soldiers. And they're cut off. And as the Germans pressed on, they captured key cities. They forced Belgians and French forces into a tight pocket around Dunkirk, which is a coastal city on the French-Belgian border. So that's in the northern part of France there. And then the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, began bombing Dunkirk. So very dire situation. I mean, if you're in the war, if you're a soldier, that's pretty dark. That's pretty serious. And the German armored units were rolling close. It looked like they were going to bring those tanks right up to the coast. So at that point, it looked hopeless. That situation, it seemed the British Expeditionary Force and many French troops were going to be wiped out or captured. And in fact, in just those few weeks leading up to that, 100,000 Allied troops were killed. And well over 1 million were taken prisoner. So this is, you don't get much darker than that. So these British and French troops, they're on the beaches of Dunkirk. They're surrounded by these forces that they don't know how close they are exactly, but the situation appeared hopeless. They were stranded on the beach, no clear way of escape, but they knew the Germans were closing in on all directions. So I have a couple quotes, or a handful actually. Eric Woods was a crewman. Well, I'm going to go lower than that. Let's see. So in a personal letter to his mother, Lance Corporal Harry Garrett said, "There's a kind of darkness here that's not just the night. It's in the air, in our thoughts. We don't know who's alive, who's dead, or what they plan to do with us if we don't get off. The sky is black, even in the day, with smoke and ash, but still we wait." So in that moment, they couldn't see. They thought either we're going to get pushed out into the sea or we're going to get, fight to the death. They didn't know. Sergeant James, a British soldier, said, Sergeant James Lomas said, "We'd walk in silence when the bombs weren't falling. Nobody wanted to speak the truth aloud that we might never get home. The darkness over the water seemed to stretch forever. Yet it was toward that blackness we walked, hoping somehow it would lead us back to England." And let me find my place again. What ends up happening is called the miracle of Dunkirk. And they call it a miracle for a few reasons, but thick fog and darkness descended over the water. Visibility was low. British leaders were uncertain whether evacuation would even be possible. The darkened waters, the fog, and the smoke from bombing runs made it nearly impossible for the soldiers to see any hope for rescue. But what many soldiers did not realize was that help was coming. The British Royal Navy, along with an armada of civilian boats, I'm sorry, I get choked up, I'm not sure why, was making its way across the channel to evacuate the soldiers. And I think what affects me about that is civilian boats. It just kind of boggles the mind to think that they knew somebody was in trouble. It says the British public answered the call to bring their personal boats, from small fishing vessels to yachts, to help rescue the men. However, due to the poor visibility and the chaos of the situation, many of the soldiers could not see that help was near until right before they were evacuated. So an eyewitness account, a boat owner from Kent who was a civilian said, "We got word that the Navy wanted boats. That was it. No poster, no speech, just a knock on the hull and a voice saying, 'Are you coming?' And we did." Actually, this is incredible in itself. Charles Lightoller, who was an officer on the Titanic and survived, says, "We were warned it would be dangerous, but I had no hesitation. My sons came with me. We loaded 130 soldiers into a boat designed for 21. They were packed like sardines, but quiet, so terribly quiet. Some wounded, others shell-shocked. As we turned for home, we were buzzed by enemy planes, but we just kept going. I kept thinking we mustn't stop, not now." And another unnamed boat owner that was a civilian says, "I wasn't a hero. I was scared stiff, but they said they needed boats, and mine was just sitting there. I couldn't bear the thought of our boys stranded like that. I never imagined I'd be sailing into a war zone. When I got back, I couldn't sleep for nights." And Eric Woods, who was a crewman, but he was on a requisitioned boat, says, "The sky was thick with smoke. We couldn't hear explosions every few minutes. At one point, we passed a destroyer on fire. I was only 19. I thought, what have I done? I just wanted to help. But then we saw them, dozens of men in the water, clinging to wreckage, waving and shouting. That's when I knew it was worth it." And all these quotes, just amazing to me, the resolve that they had. And what ends up happening when the British leadership that put this plan together, they called it Operation Dynamo, didn't even know if it could be done. They thought if they were lucky, they were going to get 30,000 of those troops back. In the end, it was 338,000. They were able to get these ships over the English Channel. And you know, sometimes I just want to make the connection here that sometimes we don't know that help is on its way. Sometimes we're the one that needs help. Sometimes we're the one that's in the darkness. But other times, we're the ones that can go and help. We're the ones that can be there for somebody, and whether it's through our own experiences, whether it's through prayer or fasting, we can come to the rescue. If the musicians could come. I want to read from Ephesians again. Chapter 6, starting at verse 10. "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. And take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit. And that's our instruction. That's what we are to do. You know, we can overcome any darkness that comes before us, not because of what's our own skills, our own abilities, or any of that, but it's because we have been called to walk in the light. Jesus said, "You're the children of the light." And there are times we're delivered from darkness, and that darkness wants to creep back into our lives. Don't let it. You know, if you have the light, you can dispel the darkness. That's the thing about light. The light itself pushes away the darkness, because darkness is the absence of light. As many as will, let's come, let's spend some time together.